I first noticed him in the coffee shop on Elm Street. Not because he was particularly striking, though his dark eyes held a certain intensity, but because he was always there. Morning after morning, same corner table, same laptop open but rarely touched, same half-finished Americano growing cold. I thought nothing of it, just another remote worker claiming their territory in our neighborhood cafe. Until I realized he was watching me, not in the casual way strangers sometimes make eye contact. His gaze followed me with purpose when I ordered, when I sat, when I left. The weight of his attention should have unsettled me. Instead, I found myself curious. Who was this man who seemed so transfixed by my ordinary routine? His name was Ethan. I know because on the 7th day, he approached my table, coffee cup clutched too tightly in his pale hand. "I'm Ethan," he said, voice surprisingly soft. "I've been trying to work up the courage to introduce myself." I gestured to the empty chair across from me, more amused than alarmed. "I'm Nora." "I know," he replied too quickly then flushed. "I mean, I've heard the barista call your name." Something fluttered in my stomach, not quite warning, not quite excitement. Just the thrill of unexpected attention from a stranger who seemed genuinely interested in me. How naive I was. How blind to the signs. When I look back now, I wonder if anything could have changed what happened. If I could have seen the obsession already brewing behind those dark, watchful eyes. "They make the best lavender latte here," I said, filling the awkward silence. Ethan smiled, relaxing slightly. "I've never tried it. I always get the same thing." "I've noticed," I admitted, surprised by my own confession. Had I been watching him too? He lit up at my words, a brightness that transformed his face. "You've noticed me?" That should have been my first real warning. The desperate hope in his voice. The way he leaned forward like I'd offered him water after a drought. But there was something so vulnerable about him that I found myself smiling back. It's hard not to notice someone who's always here when I am. His eyes never left mine. We must be on the same schedule. We weren't. I would later find receipts in his apartment, dozens of them, showing he came to that coffee shop every day, from opening until closing, waiting for me to appear. But that morning, I just thought I'd made a new friend. How foolish to mistake obsession for connection. Ethan and I began meeting regularly at the coffee shop. His attention was intoxicating in its intensity. He remembered every detail I shared, asked questions that showed he'd been thinking about our previous conversations, brought books he thought I might enjoy based on offhand comments I barely recalled making. "You mentioned loving magical realism last week," he said one rainy Tuesday, sliding a worn copy of a novel across the table. "This reminded me of you." I traced the cover with my fingertips. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." "I've underlined some passages," he admitted. "Ones that made me think of you." Later, alone in my apartment, I found dozens of underlined sections, all about a man's devotion to a woman he could never truly have. The margins were filled with tiny, precise handwriting, like Nora when she laughs. Nora's eyes do this. The way Nora would see this. I should have been disturbed. Instead, I felt a strange warmth. How long had it been since someone had tried so hard to understand me? My last relationship had ended with, "I don't think I ever really knew you," thrown at me like an accusation. But Ethan seemed determined to know every part of me. When he asked for my number, I gave it without hesitation. The text started immediately after he left the coffee shop. Nothing alarming, just a thank you for a pleasant morning, a link to an article related to our conversation. But they continued through the day. Little thoughts and observations that suggested I was constantly on his mind. "Saw a woman with a scarf like yours today. She didn't wear it nearly as well. The sunset, right now made me think of that story you told about your childhood. Are you awake?" I found myself wondering what you'd think of this poem. I responded to some, ignored others when I was busy. He never complained about my silence, just resumed whenever I engaged again. It was like having a constant companion, someone always eager to connect. When I canceled our coffee meeting to attend a friend's birthday dinner, his texts took on a different tone. "Who will you be with? Are there men at this dinner? You could invite me. I'd keep you company." I laughed it off. Bit jealous. I teased when we next met. His face remained serious. "I just missed you. When I don't see you, it's like the day has no purpose." His fingers brushed mine as he handed me my coffee. The touch lingered, deliberate. "You've become very important to me, Nora." The intensity in his eyes should have sent me running. Instead, I felt a thrill of power. To be wanted this much, to be the center of someone's world, was addictive in its own way. "You're becoming important to me too," I said, meaning it. His smile transformed his face, but there was something desperate beneath it, something hungry that I mistook for passion. Our first kiss happened outside my apartment building. We'd had dinner at a small Italian restaurant where Ethan had seemed distracted, his eyes constantly scanning the room. "Is everything okay?" I'd asked after he checked his phone for the 5th time. "Perfect now," he said, reaching for my hand across the table. I just get anxious in crowded places. Too many people looking at you. At me. The way that waiter keeps coming to our table. He's interested in you. I laughed. He's just doing his job. Ethan's grip tightened slightly. I see how men look at you when you don't notice. Like they're entitled to your attention. There was a possessiveness in his voice that should have alarmed me. Instead, I felt that same strange flutter of excitement. After a string of lukewarm relationships with men, who seemed perpetually distracted by the possibility of someone better coming along, Ethan's focused attention felt like a gift. At my door, he hesitated, suddenly shy again. I've thought about kissing you every day since we met, he confessed. When our lips touched, his body trembled against mine. He kissed me like I was air and he was drowning, desperate, consuming. His hands cradled my face with surprising gentleness, at odds with the urgency of his mouth. You have no idea how long I've wanted this, he whispered against my lips. I smiled. Since the coffee shop? Something flickered in his eyes. Longer. Before I could question him, he kissed me again, backing me against my door. The solid wood pressed against my spine as his body pressed against my front. There was something almost frantic in the way he touched me, like he was committing everything to memory. Come inside. I offered, my voice low. He pulled back, breathing hard. Not tonight. I want to do this right. His restraint surprised me. Touch me even. In the yellowish light of my building's entrance, with his dark hair falling across his forehead and his eyes holding mine, he looked almost worshipful. Good night then, I said, unlocking my door. I'll text you when I get home, he promised. He did less than 15 minutes later. Too soon for him to have reached his apartment in the neighborhood he'd mentioned. Home safe. Already missing you. Dream of me? I fell asleep smiling at my phone. In the morning, there were 9 more messages, time-stamped throughout the night. Are you sleeping? I can't stop thinking about kissing you. I wonder what you look like when you sleep. I wish I could protect you all night long. It kills me that I can't see you right now. The last one, sent at 4:17 a.m. I'm going to make you so happy, Nora. I'll love you better than anyone ever has. I should have found it excessive. Instead, I hugged my phone to my chest, feeling valued in a way I hadn't for so long. Roses arrived at my apartment the next day. 36 of them, not the usual dozen. The card read, one for each day since I first saw you. I frowned, counting backward. 36 days would place our first meeting weeks before that day in the coffee shop. When I asked Ethan about it that evening, he shrugged. I noticed you before you noticed me. You were buying tomatoes at the farmer's market. You smiled at the vendor, and I thought you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. You followed me to the coffee shop? I asked, unsure how to feel. His hand covered mine. I kept hoping for a natural way to meet you. When you started coming to my cafe regularly, it felt like fate. My cafe, he'd said, as if he'd claimed it long before I arrived. I should have been unnerved, but there was something romantic about it too. The idea that he'd been drawn to me from afar, that he'd been patient, waiting for the right moment. Most guys just use dating apps, I said lightly. I'm not most guys. His thumb traced circles on my wrist. What we have is special, Nora. From the moment I saw you, I knew you were meant to be mine. Mine. The word hung between us, both promise and claim. That night, in his apartment, I discovered the first concrete evidence of his obsession. I'd excused myself to use the bathroom and opened the wrong door. A small second bedroom converted into what could only be described as a shrine. Photos of me covered one wall. Me entering my building. Me shopping. Me having lunch with friends. All taken from a distance. All capturing moments I had no idea were being observed. On a desk sat my coffee cup, the one I'd used weeks ago and thrown away. Beside it, a notebook open to a page detailing my schedule for the past month. My breath caught in my throat. I backed away, nearly colliding with Ethan in the hallway. You weren't supposed to see that yet, he said, his voice eerily calm. I should have run. Should have called the police. Instead, I heard myself ask, how long have you been watching me? 3 months, he answered honestly. I needed to know everything about you, to make sure we were compatible. This isn't normal, Ethan. He reached for my hands, holding them gently between his. Love isn't normal, Nora. What I feel for you goes beyond anything ordinary. From the moment I saw you, I knew my life would never be complete without you. You don't even know me, I whispered. His smile was tender, terrifying in its certainty. I know you better than anyone. I know you cry during commercials with dogs. I know you always check your mailbox twice. I know you sing to yourself when you think no one's listening. All true. All things no one else knew. All things he could only know by watching me in my most private moments. I should go, I said, pulling my hands away. Please don't. For the first time, I heard fear in his voice. I know this looks bad, but I've never wanted to harm you. I just love you so much it consumes me. Love doesn't spy on people, Ethan. doesn't it? His eyes held mine. Don't you want to know everything about the person you love? Their habits, their preferences, what makes them smile when they're alone? I just took the time to learn those things. His logic was twisted, but there was something disarmingly sincere about his defense. He truly didn't seem to understand the violation. I need time to think, I said finally. He nodded, relief washing over his face. Of course. Whatever you need. Just promise you'll let me explain properly. I promised. Why did I promise? Why did I return to my apartment alone instead of going to the police? Why did I answer when he called at midnight, his voice breaking as he told me he couldn't bear the thought of losing me? I've never felt this way about anyone, he said. You're everything to me, Nora. Everything. And despite every red flag, every warning bell, something in me responded to his desperate devotion. In a world where people discarded each other so easily, wasn't there something intoxicating about being irreplaceable to someone? We need boundaries, I told him. Normal boundaries. Anything, he agreed quickly. I'll do anything for you. I believed him. That was perhaps my biggest mistake. The next weeks were a careful dance. Ethan respected the boundaries I set. No surprise visits, no texts after 10 p.m., no questions about who I was with when we weren't together. He was attentive but not suffocating, affectionate but not possessive. It was perfect. Too perfect. Like he was playing a role he'd studied carefully. But when we were together, the intensity in his eyes never dimmed. He touched me like I might disappear, fingers trailing my cheek, hand resting at the small of my back, lips pressed to my wrist where my pulse beat. Each touch a confirmation. Still here, still mine. I've never been so happy, he told me one evening as we lay tangled in my sheets. His fingers traced patterns on my bare shoulder. You've made everything in my life make sense. I rolled to face him, studying the sharp angles of his face softened in the dim light. What did you mean when you said I was meant to be yours? His hand stilled. Don't you believe in destiny? Some people are meant to find each other. Across a crowded farmer's market? I teased gently. Across anything. I would have found you eventually. His certainty was absolute. My life before you feels like a prelude. Just waiting, searching, preparing to be worthy of you. You talk like I'm some kind of miracle. Aren't you? His expression was so earnest it ached. Do you know how rare it is to find someone who feels like home? Someone whose mind you want to live inside. The phrasing unsettled me. You can't live inside someone's mind, Ethan. No, he agreed too quickly. It's just a figure of speech. But his eyes said otherwise. Said he wanted to crawl inside my thoughts, my memories, my dreams. Consume me from within until there was no part of me he didn't possess. Later that night, I woke to find him watching me sleep, his expression one of wonder. What are you doing? I mumbled, still half dreaming. Memorizing you, he whispered. Sometimes I'm afraid I'll wake up and you'll have been a dream. He gathered me against his chest, his heartbeat rapid beneath my ear. Go back to sleep, love. I'm just keeping you safe. I drifted off, surrounded by his warmth, ignoring the voice in my head that whispered. Safe from what? Or safe for whom? The next morning, I found a small silver key on my kitchen counter. To my apartment, Ethan explained, wrapping his arms around me from behind. I want you to be able to come over whenever you want. The gesture seemed sweet, normal even. The natural progression of a relationship. It was only later I realized he'd never asked for a key to my place in return. He didn't need one. Somehow, I knew with bone-deep certainty that he already had a way in. The first time I felt truly afraid of Ethan came after I canceled our plans to help a coworker through a breakup. His initial texts were understanding. Of course you should be there for your friend. That's one of the things I love about you, your loyalty. But as the evening progressed, the messages grew darker. Is it really just you and Sarah? Why aren't you answering? I drove by the restaurant. I saw him with you. The last message sent ice through my veins. I excused myself from the table where Sarah, our coworker Mike, and I were sharing comfort food and stepped outside. Are you watching me? I demanded when Ethan answered. I was worried, he said, his voice too calm. You weren't answering my texts. So you followed me? I needed to know you were safe. A pause. Who's the guy, Nora? Mike works with us. He's a friend. He's gay, not that it matters. You should have told me he'd be there. The possessiveness in his voice raised goosebumps on my arms. I don't need to report my whereabouts to you, Ethan. We talked about this. I know. He sounded suddenly small. I just miss you. I can't help it. His vulnerability tugged at me despite my anger. We're just having dinner. I'll call you when I get home. Promise. I promise. When I returned to the table, Sarah raised an eyebrow. Everything okay? Fine, I said, forcing a smile. Just Ethan checking in. Mike twirled his pasta thoughtfully. The boyfriend who sent you 48 roses last week? 36, I corrected automatically. Still excessive, Sarah noted. And didn't you say you've only been dating a couple months? Had it only been that long? Ethan had become such a constant presence that it felt like he'd always been there, watching from the periphery of my life. He's just romantic, I defended. There's romantic and then there's... Mike hesitated. Intense. I thought of the room in Ethan's apartment. The photographs. The notebook. The way his eyes followed me even when I left a room. Like he was memorizing my absence. He loves me, I said, more to convince myself than them. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing my hand. Just be careful, okay? Love shouldn't feel like being hunted. But wasn't there something primal about being the object of such focused desire? To be hunted meant to be valued above all others. Chosen. Irreplaceable. When I called Ethan that night as promised, his voice was thick with emotion. I can't lose you, he said without preamble. You're everything to me, Nora. Everything. You're not going to lose me, I assured him, even as doubt crept along my spine. Do you promise? Say you promise you'll always be mine. The possessiveness should have repelled me. Instead, I found myself whispering, I promise. His exhale was shaky with relief. I've never needed anyone like I need you. It terrifies me sometimes, how much power you have over me. The irony of his words struck me later. He spoke of my power while systematically ensuring I had none, monitoring my movements, inserting himself into every aspect of my life, creating a scenario where his constant presence felt normal rather than suffocating. Yet when he showed up at my door an hour later, eyes red from crying, I let him in. When he pulled me against him like I was his lifeline, I melted into his embrace. When he whispered, I would die without you, against my hair, I believed him. And when his desperate kisses turned urgent, when his hands clutched at me with a need that bordered on pain, I gave myself to him completely, ignoring the voice that whispered this wasn't love, but something darker. Something hungry that would never be satisfied no matter how much of myself I surrendered. I found the cameras on a Tuesday. Small, discreet, hidden in my bookshelf, my bathroom light fixture, my bedroom smoke detector. Professional grade. Expensive. Transmitting to somewhere, or someone, outside my apartment. My hands shook as I collected them, 7 in total. Each one a violation. Each one proof that the boundaries I thought we'd established had never existed at all. I placed them on my kitchen counter and called Ethan. Can you come over? I asked, voice steadier than I felt. He arrived in 11 minutes. My apartment was a 20-minute drive from his. What's wrong? He asked, concern etched across his features. Then his eyes fell on the row of cameras and something shifted in his expression. Not guilt, but disappointment. Like a child caught in a game of hide and seek. How long? I asked. He approached slowly, hands slightly raised as if calming a frightened animal. Does it matter? I needed to make sure you were safe when I couldn't be with you. This isn't protection, Ethan. This is invasion. No. He shook his head earnestly. Invasion would be if I didn't care about you. If I was just watching. But I love you, Nora. Everything I do is because I love you too much to bear being separated from you. His logic was so twisted, so sincere, that for a moment I almost understood, almost sympathized with the desperation that would drive someone to such extremes. I think you should leave, I said finally. Panic flashed across his face. No, please. I can explain better. I need space, Ethan. Space. He repeated the word like it was foreign. From me, but we're meant to be together. That's not your decision to make. Something dark passed behind his eyes. It's not a decision at all. It's fact. It's destiny. He stepped closer, and for the first time, I felt physically afraid of him. I backed away, bumping against the counter. You're scared of me, he realized, pain crackling through his voice. How can you be scared of me? Everything I do is for you. Everything. Including spying on me in my most private moments. I had to know you were safe. His voice rose, desperation edging into anger. Do you know what could happen to you? The world is full of people who would hurt you, use you. People who don't appreciate how precious you are. People like you? I challenged. He recoiled as if struck. I would never hurt you. Never. Yet there was something dangerous coiling beneath his hurt expression. Something possessive and wounded that made my instincts scream danger. I need you to leave. I repeated more firmly this time. We're done, Ethan. No. The single word held absolute conviction. We'll never be done. You're mine, Nora. Mine to protect, mine to love. We belong to each other. I don't belong to anyone. His laugh was soft, almost pitying. You still don't understand. From the moment I saw you, there was never any other possibility. We're inevitable. He reached for me, and I flinched away. Something broke in his expression then, shattered into something raw and desperate. You need time, he said, nodding to himself. Time to understand. I'll give you that. He gathered the cameras carefully, pocketing them. I'll go now, because you asked me to. But this isn't goodbye, Nora. I'll be watching over you, even if you can't see me. The promise hung in the air between us, both threat and vow. After he left, I changed my locks, blocked his number, and filed a police report. The officer was sympathetic but unhelpful. Unless he threatens you or trespasses, there's not much we can do, he explained. But document everything. I did. The flowers that continued arriving daily. The notes slipped under my door. The feeling of being watched whenever I left my building. I'll wait forever if I have to. One note read, "You're worth waiting for." I told myself I was free of him. I was wrong. 2 weeks after I ended things with Ethan, I woke in the middle of the night to find him sitting at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep. I should have screamed, should have run. Instead, I froze, heart hammering against my ribs. "How did you get in?" I whispered. "I've always had a way in," he replied, voice gentle as if we were having a normal conversation. "I would never leave you unprotected." He looked thinner, shadows darkening the skin beneath his eyes. His clothes were rumpled as if he'd been wearing them for days. "You need to leave." My voice shook. "I'll call the police." "No, you won't." His certainty chilled me. "You feel it too, Nora. This connection between us. It's stronger than fear. Stronger than doubt." He reached for my hand, and I jerked away. Pain flickered across his features. "You're still angry about the cameras. I understand, but I removed them like you wanted. Isn't that proof that I respect your wishes?" His distorted logic made my head spin. Breaking into my apartment isn't respecting my wishes. "I didn't break in. I have a key. I changed the locks." His smile was gentle, patient. "Yes, you did." The implication hung between us. No matter what precautions I took, he would find a way to reach me. My apartment, my sanctuary, offered no protection from his obsession. "What do you want, Ethan?" "Just to see you." His voice cracked with emotion. "These weeks without you have been unbearable. I can't eat, can't sleep. You're all I think about every minute." Despite everything, I felt a twinge of sympathy. His pain seemed genuine, his devotion absolute. "I'm sorry you're hurting," I said carefully. "But this isn't healthy. For either of us." "Being apart isn't healthy," he corrected. "We're meant to be together, Nora. I've tried to give you space, to respect your confusion. But I can't let you destroy what we have because you're afraid of how perfect it is." He reached for me again, and this time I let him take my hand, too afraid of what might happen if I refused. His fingers were cold against my skin. "Come home with me. I've prepared everything. You'll never have to worry about anything again." A chill ran through me. "What do you mean?" "I've made a place for us, where no one can separate us, where I can keep you safe forever." The tenderness in his voice contrasted horrifically with his words. He spoke of imprisonment as if offering paradise. "I can't leave my job, my friends," I said, trying to sound calm. "My life is here. Your life is with me." His grip tightened slightly. "Those things, they're just distractions. Obstacles. They don't love you like I do. They don't need you like I do. Ethan, please. I've been patient," he continued, speaking more to himself than to me. "So patient. Watching you, learning you, loving you from afar. Then closer. Then completely. I've earned this, Nora. I've earned you." The possessiveness in his voice made my blood run cold. This wasn't love. It was ownership. Obsession wrapped in the language of devotion. "I need to use the bathroom," I said, desperate for distance. He hesitated, then nodded. "Don't be long." I locked the bathroom door, hands shaking as I searched for my phone. It wasn't there. With sickening certainty, I knew Ethan had taken it. The bathroom window was small but not impossible. Heart pounding, I pushed it open and looked down. 2 stories. Dangerous but not deadly. Behind me, Ethan knocked softly. "Nora, are you okay?" "Fine," I called. "Just a minute. You're not thinking of leaving, are you?" His voice held no anger, only sad certainty. "There's nowhere you can go that I won't find you. We're connected, Nora. 2 halves of one soul." I squeezed through the window, scraping my arms on the frame. The drop knocked the breath from my lungs, pain shooting through my ankle as I landed. I ran anyway, barefoot, in my pajamas. I ran into the night, away from the man who loved me so completely he would rather imprison me than lose me. I went to Sarah's apartment, the only place I could think to go. She took one look at my tear-streaked face, my bleeding arms, and pulled me inside. "Jesus, Nora, what happened?" The story poured out of me, the cameras, the break-in, the talk of taking me somewhere I'd never leave. With each detail, Sarah's expression grew more horrified. "We're calling the police," she said firmly. "Right now." This time, the officers took my statement seriously. They went to my apartment, but found no sign of Ethan. No sign of disturbance at all. The bathroom window closed and locked. My phone placed neatly on my bedside table. "Are you sure you didn't dream it?" one officer asked carefully. I showed them my scraped arms, my bruised ankle. "Does this look like a dream?" They took photographs, filed a report, promised to look for Ethan. But their eyes held doubt. Without evidence of breaking and entering, without witnesses, It was my word against an empty apartment. I stayed with Sarah that night, jumping at every sound. In the morning, we went together to file a restraining order. It probably won't stop him, the clerk warned me, but it gives the police cause to arrest him if he approaches you. I nodded, clutching the paperwork like a shield I didn't believe would protect me. For 3 days there was nothing. No flowers. No notes. No feeling of being watched. I began to hope that perhaps Ethan had given up, had finally understood that his version of love was destruction disguised as devotion. On the 4th day, I returned to my apartment, Sarah accompanying me for moral support. "Are you sure you want to stay here?" she asked as I unlocked the door. "You can crash with me as long as you need. I can't hide forever," I said, pushing the door open. "And I can't let him take my home from me too." Inside, everything looked normal, undisturbed. I checked all the closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. No sign of Ethan. No new cameras that I could find. "See," I told Sarah, relief washing through me. "He's gone." She didn't look convinced. "Promise you'll call me if anything feels off? Anything at all?" I promised, hugging her tightly before she left. Alone in my apartment, I reinforced the door with a chair, checked the locks twice, and tried to reclaim the space that had once felt safe. That night, I dreamed of Ethan. Not the frightening figure who had sat at the foot of my bed, but the man I had first fallen for, gentle, attentive, his dark eyes filled with wonder when they looked at me. "I just want to make you happy," Dream Ethan whispered. "Why won't you let me make you happy?" I woke with tears on my face, confused by my own emotions. How could I still feel anything but fear for someone who had violated my privacy, my home, my sense of safety? Yet some twisted part of me missed the intensity of his attention, the absolute certainty of his devotion. In a world where love often felt conditional, temporary, Ethan had offered something eternal, even if that eternity was a prison. I pushed the thoughts away, disgusted with myself. Stockholm Syndrome, trauma bonding. I knew the terms, understood the psychological pull of my captor. That's what he had been in his way. A captor who had held my heart and mind, even while my body remained technically free. The restraining order was approved 2 days later. I carried the document with me everywhere, though the protection it offered felt flimsy at best. A week passed. Then 2. No sign of Ethan. I began to lower my guard, to believe that perhaps the system had worked for once, that the legal barrier had succeeded where locks and distance had failed. Then came the text from an unknown number. "Do you like the new place?" I frowned, confused. "Wrong number," I replied. The response came instantly. "I prepared it just for you. Everything you love. Everything you need. You'll never want to leave." Ice flooded my veins as I realized who I was talking to. "Ethan, you need help. Real help. I'm fine now that I have you back in my life. Even if it's just these messages for now. This has to stop. The restraining order means you can't contact me. Pieces of paper don't change destiny, Nora. Nothing can separate us." "Not really." I blocked the number, hands shaking. An hour later, a message from a different unknown number appeared. "Blocking me won't work. I'll always find a way back to you." I changed my number the next day, changed my email, deleted my social media accounts, created digital distance to match the physical barriers I'd erected. For almost a month, silence. Blessed, nerve-wracking silence that had me looking over my shoulder, waiting for the other shoe to drop, waiting for Ethan to prove, once again, that no distance I created could truly separate us. I didn't have to wait long. It was just an ordinary day off. I hailed a taxi to go to a spur-of-the-moment party, not even realizing what was happening. The next time I woke up, I was lying in an unfamiliar bedroom. It was far nicer than mine. Soft sheets, plush pillows, and fancy furniture that I could barely make out in the dark. All things I would never splurge on. The room was spacious, and I wasn't physically restrained, but the doors and windows were shut. I fumbled around trying to find the light switch. From the moment I woke up, I already knew what had happened. If I said I wasn't surprised at all, if anything, that I had been expecting this, would that make me some kind of twisted person? Maybe I just didn't want to face the truth about myself. Either way, I made up my mind. When I saw Ethan, I would act like a real kidnapping victim, resisting him hysterically, rejecting all his demands, and ordering him to let me go. I heard footsteps approaching from the hallway. My heart raced as I quickly moved away from the door and positioned myself defensively in the corner of the room. The lock clicked, and light spilled in from the hallway, illuminating Ethan's silhouette. "You're awake," he said softly, his voice oddly gentle. He stepped inside and flipped on the light switch. I blinked against the sudden brightness. Ethan stood there, impeccably dressed in a crisp button-down shirt and tailored slacks. His dark hair was perfectly styled, and his face, handsome in that conventional way that had always irritated me, wore an expression of genuine concern. "Let me go right now," I demanded. infusing my voice with what I hoped was convincing terror and anger. You can't keep me here. He tilted his head slightly, studying me. I've made everything perfect for you, he continued, gesturing around the room. This is all for you. Everything here. I selected it all with you in mind. Despite my determination to play the terrified victim, I found myself glancing around the room with genuine curiosity. The furniture wasn't just expensive, it was specifically curated. The bookshelf held titles I had mentioned loving in passing conversations. The color scheme matched preferences I'd once shared on social media. I should have been repulsed, but beneath my performed horror, I felt a strange flutter of, was it validation? Had anyone ever paid this much attention to me before? You're sick, I spat, recovering my role. You can't own another person. His expression darkened. I don't want to own you. I want to keep you. There's a difference. He closed the distance between us with surprising speed, his hand reaching out to touch my face. I flinched but didn't pull away. People outside don't see you like I do, he whispered. They don't appreciate what makes you special. For a split second, our eyes locked, and I felt something shift inside me. Part of me wanted to scream, to fight, to escape, to react how anyone normal would. But another part, a part I'd always tried to ignore, recognized something in Ethan's obsession that resonated with my own longing to be truly seen. I know everything about you, he countered, his fingers still touching my cheek. I know you feel alone even in crowded rooms. I know you've always wondered what it would be like to disappear completely from your life. And I know part of you is relieved that someone finally made that choice for you. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because buried beneath my fear and anger was the unsettling realization that he might be right. Ethan smiled, recognizing the conflict in my eyes. You don't have to pretend with me, he said softly. I already know the real you. And that was what terrified me most of all. Days passed. Then weeks. Ethan didn't physically restrain me, didn't lock me in a room or bind me to him. My prison had no visible bars, only the isolation of our remote location and the knowledge that any escape would be temporary. He would find me again. He always found me. You're not my prisoner, he insisted one evening as we sat before the fireplace. You're my salvation. Perhaps it was easier to believe him than to confront the reality of my situation. Perhaps loneliness made his company more appealing than it should have been. Or perhaps there was truth to his claims of connection. Some twisted bond that kept drawing me back to him despite everything he had done. He was gentle with me, patient. Each day he showed me another aspect of the life he had designed for us. The garden where he'd planted my favorite flowers. The studio filled with art supplies because I'd once mentioned wanting to paint. The library stocked with every book I'd ever expressed interest in. How do you remember all these details about me? I asked, running my fingers along the spines of books I'd mentioned only in passing. His smile was radiant with pride. You're the only thing worth remembering. In another context, from another man, the words would have been romantic. From Ethan, they were a reminder of his obsession, his cataloging of my preferences, his study of my existence, as if I were a subject rather than a person. Yet as days turned to weeks, I found myself settling into the routine of our isolated life. Found comfort in his unwavering attention, his absolute devotion to my happiness within the confines of our shared prison. Stockholm Syndrome, I told myself. Trauma bonding. I knew the terms, understood the psychology of captives developing attachment to their captors. But knowing the mechanism didn't make it less powerful. Are you happy here? Ethan asked 1 month after my arrival. His fingers intertwined with mine as we watched the sunset from the porch. The truth was complex, layered. I wasn't happy, not truly, but I wasn't entirely unhappy either. There was a strange peace in surrender, in accepting what I could not change. I'm adjusting, I answered honestly. His eyes searched mine. You'll be happy eventually. I'll make sure of it. And strangest of all, I believed him. Not because he had the power to create my happiness, but because my mind was rebuilding itself around my new reality, redefining what happiness could look like in a world limited to Ethan and this beautiful prison he had built for us. Each day, the world outside grew more distant in my memory. The outrage I had felt at his violations faded, replaced by a numb acceptance that this was now my life. I stopped looking for escape routes, stopped planning how I might reach civilization if I managed to get away. Instead, I found myself looking forward to our evenings together, to the walks we took through the surrounding forest, to the meals we prepared side by side in the kitchen, designed to my exact specifications. You're smiling more, Ethan noted one day, his face alight with joy at the observation. Was I? Had I truly begun to find contentment in captivity, or was my mind simply protecting itself, adapting to survive what it could not escape? He kissed me that night for the first time since my arrival. Tentative, questioning, his lips barely brushing mine as if afraid I would shatter at his touch. I should have turned away, should have maintained that last boundary between us. Instead, I found myself responding, arms winding around his neck, body pressing closer as something like desire awakened within me. Was it real? Or just another symptom of my captivity? My mind creating attachment where there should be only revulsion? I've waited so long for you to come back to me, Ethan whispered against my mouth. To accept what we are to each other. In his arms, the line between captor and lover blurred beyond recognition. The man who had stalked me, violated my privacy, taken my freedom was also the man who knew me better than anyone, who devoted himself to my happiness within the prison he had created. I'm not sure what we are, I admitted. His hands framed my face, eyes intense as they held mine. We're inevitable, Nora. Two halves of one soul. It just took you longer to accept it. And in that moment, I almost believed him. Almost embraced the twisted fairy tale he had written for us. The devoted lover who had gone to impossible lengths to claim his soulmate. The reluctant beloved who finally recognized the depth of his devotion. 6 months after I entered Ethan's cabin, I stopped thinking of escape entirely. The world outside had become abstract, theoretical, a place that existed in memory, rather than possibility. My days fell into comfortable patterns. Mornings in the garden, afternoons reading or painting in the studio Ethan had created for me. Evenings wrapped in his arms as he whispered promises of eternal devotion against my skin. Are you happy now? He asked occasionally, always with the same hopeful vulnerability. Yes, I began to answer. And the most terrifying part was that I wasn't entirely lying. Was it happiness? Or simply the absence of resistance? The mind's remarkable ability to normalize the abnormal. To find comfort in consistency even when that consistency is built on obsession and control? I told myself it didn't matter. That definitions of love and freedom were social constructs anyway. That perhaps Ethan's possessive devotion was simply love in its purest, most primal form. I knew you'd understand eventually, he told me one night as we lay tangled in sheets, his fingers tracing patterns on my bare shoulder. Knew you'd see that everything I did was out of love. And the most frightening part was that I did understand. Not in a healthy way, not in a rational way, but in the warped perspective that had become my reality. I understood that his obsession had never been about harming me, but possessing me completely. That in his disturbed mind, the cameras, the stalking, the isolation were all expressions of the most devoted love he was capable of. Do you love me, Nora? He asked, voice vulnerable despite his complete control of my existence. I looked into his dark, hopeful eyes and saw the man who had reshaped his entire life around me, who had built a world designed for my comfort, if not my freedom, who knew my preferences, my habits, my desires better than I knew them myself. Yes, I whispered, and felt something inside me surrender completely. I love you. His entire body shuddered with emotion, tears filling his eyes. Say it again. I love you, Ethan. He gathered me against him, heart pounding beneath my ear. I knew we were meant to be together. From the very first moment I saw you. I knew. In that moment of complete surrender, something like peace washed over me. The struggle was finished. The resistance ended. I had become what he always believed I was his. Completely, irrevocably his. Was it love? Or the most profound case of Stockholm Syndrome? The line had blurred beyond recognition. All I knew was that the thought of leaving him, of returning to a world where no one would ever know me or love me, with such consuming intensity, filled me with a dread greater than the prospect of remaining his beautiful prisoner forever.